Hello. Today we're doing a live and it's all about my favourite tree, which is a silver birch. And silver birches, taken over the last 50 or 60 years, have probably been the #1 most popular tree in Melbourne. And I'll tell you a bit of a story about silver birch. What it is, when I was young, you'd go to the nursery and a nice, trees and plants were much more expensive than what they were today. A nice silver birch, maybe 6 foot tall or something like that, was perhaps half a week's wages. I think you paid about £10 for a silver birch when I was a kid back in the early 60s. And what happened was my father had a couple of acre farm up in the Dandenongs, and he wanted to grow something that he could sell, and he became interested in silver birch because they were a very popular tree in those days, and he became interested in them, and he started importing seed from Europe and America and trying to germinate it in our fields, and he spent a couple of years before he really worked out how to do it. It's kind of easy to do, but a few little tricks, and he worked out how to grow silver birch, and then he grew about 100,000 of them a year for about 40 years. And it was really Dad that made, and he wasn't popular with every other nurseryman because lots of nurserymen had those silver birches for 10 quid, and he brought the price of them down to dollars came in, and he brought the price down to where they were only like a couple of dollars for a silver birch. And I think that was the time that they became really popular, because silver birches were once something you saw in the better homes, and all of a sudden with my dad's massive production of silver birch, anybody could buy a silver birch. They go into, it wasn't Bunnings in those days, it was McEwen's. You go in there, buy one for a couple of bucks, and you could have that sort of classy look in your house. So people bought silver birches in bulk, and they became really, really popular. And around that time, when Dad was well into it in the early 70s, he got me to pull out and sort a couple of hundred silver birches to go to the Dick Hamer Arboretum. And what you're looking at, and they planted, it was the very first forest of plants. Dick Hamer Arboretum's in the back of Olinda, and it's an arboretum where instead of planting trees individually, arboretums are a place where you go to observe trees, but instead of planting trees individually and seeing them as an individual tree, the idea of the Dick Hamer Arboretum, that trees were to be planted in groups or copses and enjoyed as they might grow in nature, as a clump or a group. And so my dad, the very first planting my dad was on the board of the Dick Hamer Arboretum, helping to raise funds and things like that to do it. And Dick Hamer Arboretum probably covers 300 or 400 acres of land. And the very first planting was 200 silver birches that my dad donated from his nursery, and I had to pull them out and take them around there. And they planted them sort of right near the entrance to the Dick Hamer Arboretum. And 50 years later, this video that you're looking at here on the screen is those birches that my dad donated. And what's interesting is that they're pretty tough. So the Dandenong's got reasonable soil and reasonable rainfall, but these were being planted. They have never really been weeded, they've never been fertilised, and they've never been watered, and they've been surviving there on the hillside there for about 50 years, and really the forest looks pretty good. So basically, I was brought up on a birch farm virtually, with my dad just producing thousands and thousands of birches. And our property was called Birch. Our house was called Birch Haven, and everywhere you look, my mum read in a book how you plant birches in clumps, and everywhere you look in Birch Haven there was a clump of birches, growing 2s and 3s in clumps, and my dad grew all different types of birch, and so we had a collection of all different types of birches, and we had birches in clumps and looking nice all around the place. So that was really my background with birches. And actually the other funny thing is that I never felt that I was paid. I started out when I left school, I'd help my dad in the nursery, and I felt that I was earning quite enough money. So what I did was I'd put an ad in the Weekly Times in the winter when the birches were, when we were digging out the birch seedlings, and I'd sell clumps of birches and birch forests, and so basically I'd supplement my wages by selling Dad's birches as, you know, clumps and forests and things like that. So really I've got quite a history with growing silver birches. Now silver birches are really, really popular, beautiful trees, and they have a lot of applications in the landscape, and I was just going to talk about that. First of all, they're great as a specimen, and so you can just plant an individual silver birch and it makes a beautiful specimen. And silver birches, they're funny because most people view them as classy, so that you put, you know, if you put 1 or 2 or 3 of them in the front of your house, it looks classy. But what's interesting is silver birches are really, really cheap. I'll just show you something here. This one here, this silver birch here, is we're selling those at the moment for $20 each, and they're not always quite that cheap. But the thing is, and what's interesting is that a young tree like this is probably one of the best birches to buy. If you go into a nursery and you see one with a white trunk and it's a bit gnarly looking, it's got birch seed all over it, it's lost its youthful vigour. But a young tree like this tree here is only 18 months old from a seed, and this tree here is it's 6 foot tall, it's 18 months old from a seed, and basically this tree has got another two or 3 years before it sexually matures and gets a white trunk. And in that 2 or 3 years, it has enormous growth potential. You could grow this up. At the moment, it's about 2 metres tall, and it would be easy to get up to 6 or 7 metres in the next 2 years, and before it gets its white trunk. And then once it gets its white trunks and start having seed pods, then you find that your silver birch slows right down. So it's really good if you want to make an avenue or a copse or a clump of silver birches. It's very smart to buy young, vigorous birches because, and you want them not just small, like small isn't the answer. You actually want them small, young and vigorous with no signs of any sexual maturity, because those sorts of birches can really grow. But these are the applications you can have for a birch, and one of the applications is to have it as a specimen. The next one is an avenue, like if you've got a reasonable length driveway, perhaps on a farm or a country property, silver birches are beautiful as an avenue, and very, very classy looking. And if you're planting them on an avenue, plant them fairly close together, because one of the things about silver birch is that in nature, silver birches they come up from wind-blown seed on land that's been laid bare by perhaps a glacier, a landslide, a forest fire or something like that. So when you get bare land, the birch seed grows across and they come up together, and birches do really, really well when they're planted together. So even in an avenue, you can plant them nice and close, and the closer you plant them, the better they're going to do. Then the other thing is, and this is what my parents did on their properties, they planted them in 2s and 3s, so that because the real feature of a silver birch is its beautiful white trunk. So if you put 2 or 3 of them in together, you're doubling or tripling the amount of white trunk that you're looking at. So it's a way with silver birch. It's a way of really increasing the impact of the white trunk by planting them into a clump. And as I said, birches love to grow together, so they grow together beautifully. Then ultimately, when you plant them in a clump, they don't get as tall as what they do as an individual specimen, but they might get a little wider. So you'll end up with something a little bit wider than a single tree, but certainly shorter than a single tree. Now, another interesting thing is that in the country, bushfires often come from the north, come in with a northerly wind, so the bushfire often come from the north, and a clump of silver birches can make excellent fire protection. And particularly if you put in a clump of silver birches and you put some spray irrigation on it as well, and you had a bushfire approaching, you'd put on your spray irrigation. If you had wet silver birches, you'll find that birches barely burn. They might cook in a fire, but they certainly won't burn in a fire. And I've seen it, I've lived up in the Dandenong most of my life, and I've seen when bushfires come through and they hit a patch of deciduous trees such as birches, it stops the fire, whereas gum trees and pine trees and things will fuel the fire. So you can stop the fire with particularly some spray irrigated silver birches planted in a clump, and birches love being in a clump. And the thing with silver birch is that in terms of controlling your environment, like we talked about the bushfire side of it, but another thing is that silver birches have a very light kind of a shade, and they cool the atmosphere without making it dark. So on the hot northerly or sunny side of the house, a mass planting, an avenue, a row of silver birches, a copse of silver birches, or a little forest of silver birches, allows the light through, but cools, but it creates speckledy shade and really cools the atmosphere. So they're a great way. And then when the leaves fall off in the winter, you get plenty of sundown through your silver birches. So they're a great way of cooling a house by mass planting them on the northern side, and they won't make the house too sort of dark and shady. Now, silver birches, their role in terms of styles of garden, they work well in a wide range of gardens. In your sort of classic style garden, you can silver birches, just your real classic or contemporary garden, or your cottage style garden, your traditional garden, your older style house, silver birches really look the part. And then in your minimalistic sort of like your modern minimalistic type of garden where you've only got one or two types of plants, your birches look really, really great, so that you can use them in a wide range. And then in your modern gardens, silver birches are really terrific, like your modern minimalistic gardens where you haven't got too many different types of plants, and it's modern, it's minimalistic, and silver birches work as well. So basically, almost anybody with any style of garden can use silver birch to their advantage. And it's amazing because not every tree can be used like that. Now, the next thing is which silver birch are you going to plant? And we'll take you through. These days, one of the most popular birches is a moss white silver birch. Now, your moss white silver birch, what it was, when I was a young guy getting going in the nursery trade, there was a guy who's a real character, knew everything about everything, fantastic bloke, and his name was Jack Moss. At any rate, he ran Moss Mott Nurseries, which was, in its day, was bigger than Fleming's. And at any rate, he grew all sorts of fruit trees and all sorts of things. And what he did was he picked out a particular silver birch and named it Moss White. And what they do is they graft it or bud it. And your Moss White silver birch is a beautiful tree. Like I actually rented one of his old properties and had a nursery there, and there was a 50 or 60-year-old moss white birch. And what's great, it's a beautiful, strong-looking tree. It has a lovely straight trunk. And as it gets older, where normal seedling birches will get black cracked trunks on them, and the bottom metre or metre and a half can turn quite black and crackly looking, the moss white only has a minimal number of black cracks in it, and you have a beautiful white trunk almost right down to the ground. And it's extra white, extra straight, and a real impact of white. And so moss white, landscape architects these days really very often specify moss white with their silver birch, and it does make a spectacular strong birch. And the other thing with the moss white is, with a normal silver birch, if you were to buy 10 seedlings and plant 10 of them in a row, you'll find that one or two of them will be kind of a little bit inferior, they won't grow that good. And whereas your moss white, 10 moss whites in a row, and they'll all grow very much the same, and you'll get a really nice, so if you want a really nice even avenue or row of birches, moss whites are the go. The next most popular birch in the upright form is your fastigiata birch. Now, I notice a lot of people with modern architecture use your fastigiata birch, and your fastigiata birch is a birch that's a bit like a Lombardy poplar. It grows tall and narrow, and the trunk and the stems have a bit of a wave in them, so you can sort of, and when it's bare in the winter, you can really see the wave, and so you have a beautiful wavy white, sort of curly white trunk, and branches, red stem branches all waving together, and and they grow quite tall but very, very narrow, and sometimes you need to give them a little bit of a trim if they get a stray branch that hangs out a little bit. But mice white birch is tall and narrow, so if you've got a narrow side of your driveway and you need a tall skinny tree that doesn't grow too big and it's not a nuisance in any way, your fastigiata birch looks really, really good. And also I've noticed lots of landscape architects use them with very modern minimalistic buildings, and particularly in winter when you're looking at that modern minimalistic building through that sort of lovely curly wave that occurs in the trunk, it looks really beautiful. The other one is called the cutleaf birch, and that's sometimes called a delcalica or a Swedish birch. Now your cutleaf birch has beautiful foliage, magnificent white trunk, but it's not as tough as your silver birch, and you really don't want to grow it unless you've got good soil, plenty of water, really good conditions. And given when everything's just right, your cutleaf birch is one of the most beautiful birches. And what your cutleaf birches does, the branches come up quite up when it's up like that, and then they hang down. So your cutleaf birch has these beautiful upward sweeping branches that then hang down on the tips. And a good cutleaf birch is one of the best looking birches you've ever seen. But I wouldn't grow a cutleaf birch unless I had good soil, plenty of water, really good conditions, because your cutleaf birch is going to, if you give it a tough like you don't like those 200 birches that we abandoned back in 1971 back in the Dick Hamer Arboretum. If they had been cutleaf birches, they probably would have all died, under the conditions that they had there. But cutleaf birch under really good, well cared for conditions, plenty of water, plenty of fertilizer, lovely soil, well drained, magnificent. Then you've got your purpurea birch, and your purpurea birch, very uncommon, not many people know it, and what's interesting, that has a white trunk, and the white trunk has a purple blush in it, so it's sort of white with a purple blush, and then it has beautiful glossy purple foliage. And these days there's two different varieties on the market, but basically you've got your purple leaf birch, and it's not as strong a grower as your green birch, and when it gets into those sort of odd foliages and odd rare birches, there's quite a lot of different ones, and the purpurea is about as rare as I'm going to get today, because I think that your mainstream of birches are really all that most people need for their garden, unless you're sort of a bit of a plant collector. Now the other birch that people really need to know about is the Black River birch. And your Black River birch, you can see it in that picture there, it's got beautiful shaggy bark with a hint of pink in it. And it has a slightly different leaf, but I love the shaggy, it's always shaggy, and I love the shaggy bark. But the Black River birch has some properties that people really need to know about. First of all, if you go and travel around in America, once you get down to LA, you won't see many silver birches, and you won't see any silver birches in Florida. But once you go south from LA, you'll only see Black River birch. And once you get down to Florida in North America, you'll only see Black River birch. You won't see your silver birch, and that's because the Black River birch is able to go into a much hotter country, a much more difficult country than your silver birch. So what that means is that up in Brisbane they sell a birch called a tropical birch, and that tropical birch is actually a Black River birch. And so you can grow them right up to Brisbane. So in Sydney where growing birch is a little bit marginal, Black River birch fantastic. But the same thing, if I was in Mildura or I was out the back of Bendigo somewhere and I had some pretty hot tough country, Black River birch would be my choice of birch. And actually it kind of, other times I've grown a little forest of Black River birch once, and I love them. I love the shaggy bark. But the other thing about the Black River birch is it'll take wet feet. Your normal silver birch, flood it for a couple of weeks if you've got some swampy spot and it floods for 3 or 4 or 5 weeks in the winter, your silver birch is a goner. If it's not dies, it'll get very, very sick, whereas your Black River birch will love it. So Black River birches take wet feet, and they take hot and difficult conditions. So as you go north of the divide, and if you're getting into hot and difficult country, really consider the Black River birch as something that you could plant. And and you can do all the same things, plant them as a copse, plant them as a forest, plant them as an avenue, they'll do all the same things. And they tend to be not quite as tall as your normal silver birch, and they tend to grow a little bit wider, and they're a little bit more branchier, but beautiful sort of shaggy pink bark, lovely foliage, really, really tough. So Black River birch have a real place in our, you know, in Victoria, in your landscape, and you don't have to be in tough country to, you know, Black River birch will do well anywhere in Melbourne, and it gives you a birch with a real difference to the silver birch. And then one of the most popular birches of all is your Betula youngii, and people get confused because people come in and say they want a weeping birch, and your normal silver birch, some people will call a weeping birch because it does weep on the ends. But your Betula youngii is how they make a Betula youngii is they get a silver birch that's, you know, they grow up 3, 4, 5, 6 foot, and then they go along and they bud or graft the youngii onto it, and the youngii will come up and then hang down like that. And so if a youngii was budded at, say, 1.8 metres, which is the most common height that they get budded at, in 10 or 15 years, it's only going to get 2.5, 2.6 metres. It's going to get lovely and thick and bushy. It's going to cascade to the ground. And the weeping birch or youngii is one of my favourite weeping trees. I think that they're beautiful. Where your weeping cherry would leave a weeping birch for dead when it's in full blossom in spring, for the whole rest of the year, the weeping birch with lacy foliage, its white trunk, its lovely sort of red lacy little stems, the way it cascades, just the whole look and feel of it, it really is one of my favourite weeping trees. And the other thing about your Betula youngii is you can fit that, if you don't feel you've got room for a full-on silver birch and you've got a little courtyard but you want the look and feel of a silver birch, courtyard, you know, great for a little confined area. But also, it would be, when I do lots of garden designs of cottage gardens, and my favourite tree for a cottage garden is a weeping silver birch. And something about the wispiness and the softness and the fact that they kind of move in the wind and everything like that just really makes a youngii or a weeping silver birch really, really work for me. And then last of all, I guess I'll go through selecting and planting a silver birch. Now, I mentioned about how silver birch do best if you plant them at a younger stage, before they've sexually matured. By planting them at a younger stage, you capture more vigour. And as you plant them as bigger, older, and more established trees, they have less. They don't grow as quickly when you first plant them. So it's really good to do that. And then in terms of planting them, your Black River birch will take a bit of a swampy hollow and some heavy compacted clay and difficult conditions, but your normal silver birch has a shallow root system, and if you've got very poor clay soil, you can simply make a mound of nice soil, sort of a shallow mound of nice soil, and cultivate it, and you don't have to dig real deep for a birch. They really want to spread their roots out, and they don't have a big terrible root system, but they want to spread their roots out nice and shallow. So and you'll find if you put out, say, pine bark mulch or something like that they love running under a garden with pine bark mulch. But the thing that birches hate more than, like, all trees hate to be planted in the lawn, but birches absolutely abhor, they don't hate it, they abhor being planted in the lawn, and they perform terribly. It's very fashionable to get a birch and lay some turf right up to the trunk of it and have this beautiful white trunk popping up with grass around it. But if you do that, you're absolutely guaranteed to fail, because birches hate grass. I don't fully know why it is, but they do. And so often people come into me and say, oh, Chris, I bought a birch tree off you 2 years ago and the damn thing's never moved. I don't know what's wrong. I water it, I look after it, and it's never grown. And you say, look, if it's got grass around the base, they go, yeah. You say, look, get rid of the grass. Have a 3 or 4 foot circle. You can mulch it, you can grow some flowers there. Do what you want there. Put some pebbles around, do whatever you want, but get rid of the grass. And then those people that come by a year or 2 years later and say, you know, as soon as I got rid of that grass, the thing just took off and went like that. And so all trees hate being in the grass, but birches hate the grass more than any other tree. And I remember one time a friend of mine bought a birch forest from me, and I told him about getting rid of the grass and having mulch and everything around the birch forest and not having the birches in the lawn. And what happened was that he bought quite a lot of birches, might have been over 100 of them. He was on a farm and he did a very big forest of birches, and he only got half of it, sort of, where it was only half of it, he only had time to get rid of the lawn on half of it. And I remember visiting him maybe 18 months later, and where he'd mulched, the birches were doing great, and where he'd mulched and that, and where they were in the lawn, half of them hadn't grown and the other half had died or died back in, the tops were dead on them, you know, where he was trying to grow them in the lawn. So it really demonstrated how much birches need to be planted. So when you plant a forest or a copse, have a nice big area of mulch around them, then they love water. And if you want them to grow really, really quickly, in the warm months, you'll absolutely drown them once a week and maybe give them a little supplementary water as well. So plenty of water. And people will say birches love fertilizer, but they love little bits of fertilizer often. So if you say you buy a beautiful young birch like this birch that we've got here, and you want to grow an avenue, you've got a nice birch like that, and you want to grow an avenue or a copse or a little forest or something like that, the way that you do it is you plant it, you work up the soil, and what the roots want to spread shallow and wide, so you work up the soil, you mulch it, you put irrigation on it, and you really soak them. To get them growing quick, you absolutely drown them once a week, and then you regularly put on small, regular doses of fertilizer. And a tree like this, there'd be nothing to take a tree like this and have it up 3.5, 4 meters a year from now if you were to do that with it. So silver birches have tremendous growth capacity. They have tremendous growth capacity if you treat them just right. And last of all, if you don't want them to grow at all, just put grass around them. And all
right, let's. I think we've got a few questions here, so let's jump over to our questions on silver birch. So someone asked, I think you've already answered this, and it depends on how they grow them, but someone just asked on Facebook, Calligraphy and Garden asked, how tall will they grow?
Right, it very much depends. Like if you're in open, windy, like say you lived out in Colac or somewhere like that, and you put them out in an open area, I'd say sort of 6 meters. But up in the Dandenongs, like in a nice sort of sheltered spot with fabulous soil and water, I'd say 9 meters.
Okay, beautiful.
Yeah, and then you
so left to grow 9 meters, yeah?
Yeah, and say a Black River birch would be a bit shorter.
Okay, awesome. We've got another one here. A few questions are coming up. Are the root on this one, people worried about the roots being invasive? What would the answer be to that?
They're nowhere near as invasive as many other trees. They do have where birches are bad is asphalt. Like with concrete, birches have fairly small roots and they're not too bad. But the where I've seen them wreck things is if you plant them near asphalt, they'll tend to run under the asphalt and put little mounds in your asphalt. But I've never seen them crack concrete there or wreck foundations or anything like that. They seem to be there, and they are shallow rooted, and they don't have massive roots.
And if clumped together, you mentioned that also keeps them smaller, right? Like when
that keeps their overall size small.
Beautiful. Hopefully that answers that question there.
And also, if you had a very confined area and you're worried about the roots, you'd go for a weeping youngie eye, or there's another one you can get which is called a mop top silver birch, and both of those are very, very compact. And so if I was in a very confined area, really worried about the roots, I'd go for the youngie eye or for the ball on a stick mop top one.
Yep, lovely. There you go. Kiara on Facebook was asking that one. We've got another one here from Carla on Facebook asking, do they drop their leaves in the winter time?
Yes, they do. And actually what's good about them is that when they're in your garden, they drop their leaves in mid or late June and they're leafing up by the mid of August, so their dormancy is quite short. And when they are dropping their leaves, they have beautiful sort of rich golden autumn colour.
All right, there you go, Carla. Hopefully that answers that for you there. There's not an evergreen variety, isn't there?
There was an evergreen variety, but I don't think anyone's producing it anymore. But there was an evergreen variety on the market about 20 years ago, and it's one that I've been meaning to follow up, but it's certainly off the market at the moment.
All right, beautiful. There you go, Carla. Mike asks here on Facebook, do they grow well in pots?
No, not really. It's hard to keep the foliage looking. I find that they get little black dots on them and the leaves drop off, so they're not something I ever really recommend as a pot plant. If I was going to grow one in a pot, I would grow the Youngii, and I'd grow it in a good sized pot, and I'd give it plenty of lime, plenty of water, plenty of fertiliser. But to keep them looking good for the whole year in a pot is a bit difficult.
Okay, Mike. There's the answer to that. And we have another question here on Facebook from Raylene asking, do they require lots of water and do you deliver to Bacchus Marsh?
We out to Bacchus Marsh every week, and if you spend over $300, we're a free delivery out to Bacchus Marsh. And birches, once established, in Bacchus Marsh you will need to water them all of their lives in the summer, but not like that. Drowning them once a week is what you'd do if you wanted to have really, really fast growth. If you wanted to buy a 1.8 metre one and grow it up to 3.5, 4 metres in 12 months, you would drown it every week. But once established, you would give it a couple of deep waters through the summer if you lived out in Bacchus Marsh, but you wouldn't have to water it all the time. I wouldn't say it's not like a willow tree or anything like that, but if you wanted to never water it, it's not the tree for you. It's in Bacchus Marsh. You hot dry summers, and you'd have to do a couple of deep soaks, but I wouldn't call it a big water user. Certainly no worse than a Japanese maple or many other deciduous trees.
All right, perfect. I think that's all our questions there on Facebook. There's a comment here from YouTube from Mama Knows Best saying, hello from Vancouver. There you go, it's just a comment.
Hi, Mama Knows Best.
And then they do have a question, but it's not Silver Birch related. Maybe you can tune in on Monday at 12 p.m. Australian Eastern Standard Time. I'm not sure what time it is in Canada right now, but we will be doing a question and answers on garden design and plants on Monday, which would be perfect for the question they've got there. We're just keeping on the topic of Silver Birch here, so we'll definitely love to answer that for you on that live. If there's any other questions, please feel free to get them through now, or I think we just wrap it up here. Anything else you want to add, just while we wait to see if any others come through?
What else can we talk about Silver Birch? Oh, look, interesting story. We've actually been liaising with a Finnish gentleman who is writing a book about Silver Birch, and he'd scanned the internet and found that we were growing Silver Birches in Melbourne, and he said that Finnish scientists had said that you couldn't grow them at our latitude, that they were more of an Arctic type of tree, and that's why I went and did the video of the forest that my dad started 50 years ago, just to demonstrate to the Finnish people that that we can grow birches really well here. But the funny thing is about the connection with Finnish people and silver birches is when Dad got growing silver birches, we had a whole field of silver birches over the back of the place. At any rate, a Finnish family migrated to Australia, and it was a husband and wife with 10 children, and their name was Torkola. And at any rate, they loved silver birches, and my dad would sort of chop down and throw away some old silver birches that were crooked and unsaleable, and he would make brooms out of it. He'd use the branches as brooms, and he told me that in Finland they made shoes from them, and they made their own sauna, and they used to whip themselves. They'd get hot, and then they'd go out in the icy cold, and they'd whip themselves with the birch branches. And it was really interesting because it made them, having this field of silver birches next door just reminded them of being in Finland. And it's interesting because in Finland the silver birch is their national tree, and they love silver birches, and these people just loved having, they were lucky, they moved to Australia and found themselves next to a whole giant field of silver birches, and they were able to use the bark and the branches and use these birch broom was sort of the bark of the broom twisted, the bark of the trunk twisted around the little branches on an actual trunk of birch. But it was kind of a funny coincidence, and today I'm just liaising with the gentleman, the scientist from Finland, who's writing a book on silver birches, and including silver birch growing in Australia as proof that they can grow at these warmer latitudes. So just a little aside, little story.
Great story, actually.
Yeah.
And I love the fact that you can grow them also in places like Florida or Queensland. You know, the river
black
birch,
river birch.
yeah.
That's right. But you'll be in serious trouble with the ordinary silver birch.
Yeah. All right, guys. I think that's pretty much it. There's no more new questions which have come through. So join us on Monday. We'll have a general plants and garden design live at 12 p.m. Australian Eastern Standard Time. Thanks so much for joining us, everybody, today.
Yeah. Thank you. See you later.